Okay, hello everyone, welcome. Welcome to this webinar all about API exploration for designers. So my name is Frank Commons. I'm an API technical evangelist here at SmartBear, and I'm delighted to be joined by Temil Sanchez, product manager for Explore and the broader API lifecycle. Temil, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Yeah, hello everybody. Welcome to API exploration for designers, and hopefully everybody gets some good information from this webinar.
Yeah, great. So just a few housekeeping things before we get going. This session is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will get out there to you for your on-demand viewing pleasure. If you do have questions throughout the session, we do encourage you to ask those. So please do use the Q&A facility within your Zoom window. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves as well, and we'll do our best to get to some of those questions towards the end. There might be one or two polls popping up as we're talking, just to get your gauge on certain questions and just get you interacting a little bit throughout. So today's agenda, we'll briefly look at API exploration and talk a little bit about what it is and try to contextualize it for the remainder of the session for today. We'll zoom out then a little bit and take a look at some of the broader API trends and challenges that we see, and where API exploration can perhaps help address some of those challenges. We'll then be focusing into the API designer persona and looking at how we can improve API design outcomes with SwaggerHub Explore, which is our tool for API exploration. We'll be talking a little bit about an execution gap that we see across the market as well. And we'll be talking then through a demo. So just again, giving a little bit of an overview as to some of the designer, let's say, challenges and how exploration comes in to help with those. We'll switch out then to talk about the roadmap and some of the new features that are coming along. And then hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes towards the end for some questions and answers. So I think a poll will be popping up shortly just to gauge your input on where you're experiencing some friction across the development lifecycle for APIs. And I'm just leaving it up on screen here for the benefit of those viewing on demand. And I think with that, Temil, we will get into the meat of the webinar today. And we've had many conversations, Temil, over the last couple of months around API exploration. And of course, there's different, interpretations out there as to what it is. But for me, it's all about interacting with the surface area of an API in order to be able to carry out different activities, be it understanding how the API works to determine if it solves the intended problem and in the way that you would expect from an API consumer. Maybe you want to kind of prove out assumptions that you have made, iron out maybe any misunderstandings on how things should work, validating your expectations. We all have expectations when we start interacting with an API. So you want to prove out, are they reasonable? If I create a record, for example, can I then retrieve it? Is that possible? Maybe helping you to make sense of that documentation and or work through certain documentation gaps that are there. The analogy that I often fall back to is it's a little bit like, purchasing a car. So you might do your research online, you might visit some car dealership websites, you might find the model you want, you might download a brochure, you might have all of the color palettes, all of the specifications, all of the configuration options. Maybe even that car dealership gives you a virtual simulation so you can kind of virtually test drive it. But there's nothing really like being there in person, getting into that car and taking it for a test drive. And I think that's very representative of how we look at exploration from an API perspective. You want to determine, is an API easy to learn? Is it safe to use? Is it appropriate for the audience or for the industry? And assess the overall developer experience, I guess. Anything you'd like to chime in on there?
Yeah, that's, what, Frank, I love that analogy. It's perfect, and it speaks towards the real world. The last thing you want to do after you purchase a car, if you've never tested it and you've taken it for a test drive and you turn the steering wheel to the left and it turns to the right, that's going to be a huge problem. We know that, folks sometimes spend way too much time in the implementation phase of their API implementation, right? When it's third-party API, because they don't know the ins and outs, and they're trying to figure it out as they go in code. So API exploration really provides, that front layered option for you to just, test all the edge cases and really understand what types of outputs will come out of the inputs that you provide to this API. So again, that's a great analogy, and in the API exploration process can really help that from a consumer's perspective. Now, there's other perspectives as well, depending on what if you're implementing APIs, there's also a lot of value in you making sure that you talk towards the developer experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always good when we talk about exploration as well and kind of where it fits in. It's always good to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at some of kind of the trends and the challenges that we see across the industry. Now, of course, SmartBear, we've a rich history of kind of trying to keep our finger on the pulse with regards to what's happening across the API landscape. And I guess this is front and center in my mind because last week we launched the latest version of our State of Software Quality for API report. So I'm kind of still knee deep in all of the results there. But some of the key trends that we see coming back over the last number of years is that the number of APIs that we're all dealing with is increasing. This has been fueled by a number of drivers within organizations. In many cases, it's set against, the backdrop of API programs that are not as mature as we'd like them to be. So that's resulting in lots of APIs not being cataloged or not being managed by traditional API management tooling. So that will hinder, of course, the discoverability and the adoption of APIs and ultimately make it harder to maintain and harder to achieve success for a given API.
Yeah, that's 100%. So another thing that we see is that the majority of API practitioners are still using REST as a predominant way to type of API that they're implementing. But there are other emerging protocols that solve very specific problems, and it's inherently important for tools to be able to support multiple protocols to ensure that we that all the landscapes of the API protocols are being supported in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. They all have lots of different pros and cons. It's no longer about we're only a REST shop or we only deliver event-based architecture. In general, as we start delivering more complex systems, using different API styles based on their positive attributes, dealing within the constraints that you have as a team or as an organization, and picking the right style to solve the problem in the best way is what's happening out there. What we're also seeing is that there's this continued shift left trend happening for testing, for development, for design. So more responsibility is falling onto certain personas earlier and earlier in the delivery cycle. So we all want to deliver software of higher quality, and this is also meaning that we're engaging with more stakeholders earlier in the software development lifecycle. Now, that's, of course, what we want. We want to kind of capture and get that input as early as possible into the art of building software. But we also need to give those stakeholders a means to be able to understand the software that's been built without necessarily having to be in code, so that they can effectively collaborate as fast as possible. And it's all about getting those shorter feedback loops to be critical if we want to indeed move faster.
Right. I would say, I love the term that quality is everybody's job, right? It's not just further down the line or beginning, it's everybody. And given those additional stakeholders, it's really important that, that we use tools that make sense to everybody. So that's definitely very important. Also, standardization, security, and multi-purpose reuse are top of mind in the industry. Those are the most important things when people are implementing APIs. They're trying to build APIs faster, hence a reuse. They're trying to standardize to ensure they're following organizational standards so that things aren't going off the rails, and that the experience is very similar across the board for APIs that are being produced. So all this ties back to to the development phase and being able to implement a certain criteria for understanding the type of APIs that are being built, and exploration can definitely provide a key point in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking about, good quality APIs, API design is non-trivial, of course, so we've seen in the earlier slide some of the trends and challenges. So increasing numbers, mixture of styles and protocols, trying to get ahead of standardization. So what I would say is, looking at modern software development, APIs are arguably going to be the longest living artifact that we will deliver. So it's imperative that we design that interface in a way that it will remain stable, that we can evolve it gracefully. The underlying technical stack itself may come and go, but that interface or that promise that you're making to API consumers will need to be designed well in order to stand up to the test of time. And Temil, when we talk about SwaggerHub Explore, before we get into maybe how it can help the designer role, why don't you give everyone a brief overview as to what it is?
Yeah, so SwaggerHub Explorer is a tool that's been on the market for about 2 months now, and it's getting a lot of traction. And the best thing about it is that it has no friction. It allows you to get in there, start interacting with RESTful and Kafka services. As of now, there's more to come in the future, without any additional flurry functionality, and it really drives users to gauge that understanding of the API. Without them having to get out of the comfort zone. So again, being able to bring in those stakeholders earlier and have them understand, the quality of the API or the functions of the API is really important, and Explorer really hits home with that problem.
Great. So sounds like there's a good few benefits there. And then what I always, or one of the things that I found really interesting when I was going through our latest kind of survey and the results is that for me, there seems to be a little bit of an execution gap happening. So it's very natural in today's delivery cycles that we understand what our team is good at or what our organization is good at, and then we understand the value that's offered by others. So when you kind of apply this to the API landscape, it means that the majority of teams and organizations are both producers of APIs and consumers of APIs. And when we kind of put that consumer hat on, I think it's interesting to look at what expectations API consumers have with regards to the APIs being provided towards them. So looking at what's important for consumers, we learned that ease of use and accurate detailed documentation are the top expectations, and that's coming back kind of consistently over the last number of years. So if you're in the business of providing APIs and you care about quality, then you need to make sure the documentation is up to par, the APIs themselves are easy to use, and the delivered APIs they're stable, they're responsive, and they're performant. So given the fact that 75% of us are producing and consuming APIs, and we have such high expectations from a consumer perspective, then surely when we're designing and delivering an API, we will do so that it would make ourselves happy as a consumer. Well, what we're seeing is that doesn't necessarily tie up. So there's a little bit of an execution gap between the expectation versus the reality when the consumer context is applied. So looking at it from a provider perspective, we can see that only 48% are confident their APIs are well documented, and only approximately 43% are unsure that their processes will deliver the appropriate developer experience that they themselves would expect from a consumer perspective. So what we're going to kind of tease out is, can exploration help us address this kind of execution gap and enable designers to deliver higher quality API designs and work with the teams to end at the place where the delivered APIs themselves will meet their consumer expectations. So looking at the challenge from, let's say, a provider perspective, we're all trying to improve the overarching quality of the APIs, the developer experience accompanying them, and that will lead us to hopefully a place where our APIs are adopted. And if our APIs are adopted and used by many consumers, then they have a higher chance of being regarded as being successful. So we really see API designers playing an important role across the different phases of the provider lifecycle, be it working with the business stakeholders to work out and define what needs to be delivered and what problem is going to be solved, obviously working in the design phase itself, but then working beyond that with development, with technical writers, with testers. And it's always good from a designer perspective also to be aware of what's happening once that API is in production. Can you observe how it's being consumed? And is it being consumed as you intended the design to be consumed? I think that's always useful information, especially when you come into the next iteration. Now, talking about, sorry, Temil, would you like to interject?
So just to add a little bit to that, right? It also enhances the experience when producing the API and writing code, right? You want to get really quick feedback of, are things working as expected, right? And the last thing you need is to, rebuild the wheel. So this definitely is an opportunity also to introduce, make sure that the stakeholders are in line with what's being produced while development is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a design perspective, of course, we see it as a design aid, so it really allows designers to kind of design with developer experience in mind, wear that consumer hat effectively, and collaborate with other stakeholders who can really prove out and validate that design against the business goals. And moving even beyond the production and into the productization, as we mentioned, it can enable the designers to work with the tech writers, spot any documentation gaps that are there, and end up delivering the maximum quality within their API docs. Designers themselves, together with their product management colleagues and developer relations, can also really ensure that conformity to developer experience standards are being met. And what we might do now, Temil, is we might kind of walk through a little bit of a static workflow to kind of showcase how you can combine the exploration capability with some other tools that are there within our API lifecycle suite to ensure that, let's say, a design first approach can deliver the maximum quality possible.
Right.
So what we have here, go ahead, Temil, you can drive if you want.
Yeah, so just to add, just to give you a hand here, I mean, from a design first perspective, right, we've talked a little bit about how designers can use exploration to really sit inside of the developer's shoes and really enhance the design process by this, because they will see what type of data structures are being built. Do they work well? Do they sit well? And this is a very good place where you could start using API exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we see here is that, those requirements will be taken in. The designers will work towards getting a candidate design. They'll be looking to kind of retrieve as much feedback as possible. So designers, external feedback from security, from architects, even automated feedback from your CI/CD pipelines and validating against your standardization rules. That will all come in. Exploration can really support the manual aspect of that to determine, is this candidate good to take into the next stage? If so, then you have a candidate that you can hand off to the development team and to the testing team and even the tech writing team to start parallelizing some of their work, should I say. Moving then on to kind of the development side. So once you have that candidate, the development team will obviously start building the implementation to make sure that it is conforming to the design that's set out. And once there's anything there to be validated, it's very nice to have an easy to use exploration capability to prove out even locally on your own device. Is the API working as you would expect? Can you kind of start interacting with it without having to necessarily automatically start writing unit tests against it? From a testing perspective, then, of course, it's good to be able to explore the development endpoints that have been delivered by the development team so that you can start formulating your test suites and your testing strategy to ensure that you have the appropriate coverage that's there. Once we're happy with that and we're at the place where we can deploy and we're using other checks like the can I deploy check from Packflow to determine, is it safe to make this change into the target environment? Once all of that goes well, then indeed there can be a final check, again, exploring the documentation, really scrutinizing it from a consumer perspective to ensure that it meets everything that's needed and then published to API gateways or developer portals or whatever the case may be. So what we might do now is we might run through a little bit of a demo, kind of maybe showcasing and zooming in a little bit more on the designer perspective. And to set some of the context here for the quick demo, this is just a very high level architecture overview of an application that I'm kind of working on from a designer perspective. So I've certain aspects kind of grayed out here because they're not really applicable, but I'm going to focus on a pet service and an adoption service. And this is part of an overarching pet and adoption store, which is a combination of request response type endpoints, but also publish and subscribe mechanisms. And we'll be using OpenAPI to describe the RESTful endpoints and Async API to describe the more event-driven architecture, which will be exposed through Kafka. So what I'm going to do is just jump over to my browser. So just make sure everything is up and running from a code perspective. It is. So what I have here is SwaggerHub, and what we have is we have a pets and adoption API, which is a RESTful API, and a pet store async API, which is all describing what's on top of Kafka. And I'm not going to get too much into depth of the actual API writing the designs. That's not the scope of this specific call. But what we do see is that we have a common editor experience across the RESTful Open API flavor of creating the artifacts, as well as the async API ones as well. Let's give that a moment to come back. And we have all of the inputs described. And one of the important things that we'll be doing from a designer perspective is making sure that we're documenting all of this, of course, making sure that we have the appropriate examples in there and all of the HTTP response codes as well. And thinking about how folks will start interacting with this design. And for me as a designer, working towards this being a design candidate that I want to collaborate with other stakeholders and eventually have a candidate that can be handed off to development. It's always good to think about what consumers regard as being very important. And if I just jump back to the slides momentarily, what we also know from looking at how developers interact with the design artifacts, we always should keep in mind that examples, status and error codes, and how authentication is described is regarded as being the most important features delivered by those design artifacts. And I think focusing in on examples, it makes sense, because as humans, we learn through examples, and it becomes very easy for us then to understand the workflow and the use cases that are being offered by an API. Now, as a designer, I think it's good for me to be able to focus on the actual examples themselves. So here I have a static API. Of course, it's just an API definition. It's static. Nothing has been implemented yet. And I have enabled the auto mocking integration through SwaggerHub, which means I can start interacting with the designs that are in that static artifact. Now, I can do that with the try it behavior directly, but I can also take myself out of that context and more put myself in the seat of a consumer, scrutinizing those examples to determine if they tell the appropriate story. So what I've created here is a space within Explore, which takes me through all of the examples that are described within that Open API definition. So I'm able to kind of walk through and scrutinize these to determine if they tell the appropriate story. So I can get the pets. So that makes sense. Now, can I post a new pet? Is this example going to make sense? So if I send a sample request against the API design artifact, can I indeed see the response back that is representative? And again, I can. So we can see that the request has been enriched with the ID and also with the status of that pet. Can I then update that pet through the patch endpoint? Again, I can just make sure that it's available. And again, this is just tying the whole story together for me through the examples that are in the definition. Now, can I adopt that pet? So can I indicate this is the pet I want to adopt? This is the location of the pet. And again, validating that all of these examples make sense. Because what this will do is it'll give me a certain amount of confidence that when people are interacting with that design, if they're looking at the examples that are there, it's not just a random representation of the actual schema according to or as defined by the certain endpoints. All of the examples come together to tell an overarching story, which just improves the quality of that API design definition. So what we can imagine then is that the developers have taken this and then they have moved on and they have built some code. So what I can then start doing is, again, through the Explore interface, I can start interacting with the actual pets development service itself. So here I'm getting a pets. There's no pets yet added to the store, so nothing is coming back. Can I then send a real post request to the development endpoint? So again, I'm following on from the documentation. I'm following on from the examples that I saw in that design artifact. I send that request. Again, I can see it's coming back here with a dynamic ID. Then can I subscribe? So there's also the event-driven aspect. So can I subscribe to the pets added event? So if I do subscribe to that, I can see that that message that I've just issued in the previous request has indeed been picked up and put on the Kafka topic, and I'm able to explore that. And I'm able to collaborate back with the development team, answer any questions that they may have directly through the Explore interface. So we're all kind of talking the same language. We're all leveraging the definitions themselves, plus the easy way to explore in order to be able to work towards the best possible API design in the quickest feedback loop possible. So we had very limited time for the demo today, so apologies for that. But what we will move on to now is some of the insights into the roadmap. So Temil, I will let you take this one away.
Yeah, sure thing. So what's next? And it's funny because somebody asked a question towards this already, but you know what we're trying to do in July is seamless integration with SwaggerHub. We see there's a tremendous amount of value in being able to try things out within the SwaggerHub try it out option, but with the Explorer, which you'll have a way of getting there quickly from that particular page, you can expand that interaction with more than one API, with more than one parameters, and really get a sense for how this API works. So to answer the question on the chat, hopefully here, yes, we will have that, and it's hopefully coming out pretty soon. We will also have the capability of generating OAS. So if you're past the point of design and you've built the API already and you have no OAS file and you want to quickly create documentation, you will be able to do that from Explore, and even better yet, push it directly into SwaggerHub for seamless interaction there, and make sure that you increase adoptability of your APIs via that documentation process. And then in August, we'll have some work for realistic workflows and allow users to build real scenarios to really enhance the understanding of the APIs. Where it's really nice when you could send a post message and then go back to get and try to get that message. But if you can automate that process a little bit better, it'll increase the the speed of which you can understand the APIs. And furthermore, we will work on collaboration, how you guys can share the work that you've done within Explore, i.e. either within the context of SwaggerHub or within the context of Explore itself. So really exciting times, really exciting things that are coming here to the SwaggerHub world. And seeing how that is definitely taken into market is really, really meaningful. There are a couple of questions on the questions tab. I'm not sure if you've seen those, Frank, so maybe we could go over them.
We'll take a look through. So maybe just to mention some of the takeaways, and this will all be shared with you after today's webinar, but here's some of the links to try it out. Some of the more advanced demonstrations as well that kind of go through it in a lot more detail. We also have a What's New series, so it really kind of keeps you up to date on a monthly basis with regards to the new features that are dropping. So features are dropping thick and fast for the Explore project, and we do really encourage your feedback because it's a very young tool right now. So you have an opportunity to really give us some great feedback and influence the roadmap as well. So what I'll do is I will take some of the questions, Temil. Any that you would like to send my way?
So one of them is, one of the benefits of Swagger Open API is not only the API documentation, but for using the spec to generate client code, Swagger Code Gen. So that's an interesting perspective. And then the actual question is, in regards to Web3 and smart contracts, I've seen some tools to create Open API documentation and specification files because there is still a need to generate code for Web3 clients. Is Web3 smart contracts something SmartBear is going to be addressing? So I think there, I could take that. So there's definitely room for improvement there and better understanding of how the market's taking up this very specific SDK. So to tell you the truth, I'm not 100% sure, but there's room for us to do some further investigation of the market there.
Yeah, and with regard to the SDK delivery as well, on the Swagger CodeGen side, on the open source side there, we are planning to do some advances there this year. So we're focusing on OpenAPI 3.1 compatibility now across all of the Swagger open source products, and they'll make their way into the commercial products as well. So stay tuned there. That will be happening over the next couple of weeks, and CodeGen will be part of that. I think one of the very interesting things that we're working on in the API community at large is the concept of workflows and being able to tell the story of APIs better, and that will allow us to even generate very, very tailored SDKs for specific use cases and negate the need for maybe the additional bloat that might be part of the other 40 endpoints that per se you might not be interested in for any given use case. So I'm quite excited about some of the potential that's there as well. So hopefully that answers the questions. I'm not aware of any specific work that we're doing on smart contracts.
One more question in here is, so the interactions with APIs are great, especially if you interact it with SwaggerHub. But what about, is there any historical records of the API interactions that you interact with in SwaggerHub Explore?
Yes, there is. So I'll just jump back here. So all of the requests that I've been making, they all get recorded in the transaction history log. So I'm able to, look at any of these. So here's some of the ones that you would have seen. So this was my call to the endpoint, creating a new pet. I can open the details. I can see all of the metadata around what happened as part of that transaction. So the request body that I made, the status code that came back, the execution time on the server, and we have an ability to clean up these logs if you're not too interested. I can also select a chunk of these things, of these logs, should I say, and I can automatically create a space for it so that it will be then in my spaces and it'll be nicely organized, and it'll allow me to kind of focus in on the work that I'm doing. And as Temil mentioned in the roadmap, one of the things that will be there is also making the ability to kind of share these spaces and collaborate on these spaces much, much easier for teams, so that they can really focus on extracting the value out of the APIs as quickly as possible. Anything else you'd like me to jump into here, Temil?
I don't see any more questions. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about, this is definitely a cloud product, right? It's a SaaS product, but you have interacted with local APIs. Maybe the process that you've taken to do that might be important to folks here.
Yeah, sure. So if we see this little icon over here, if I click on this will open up the connection execution menu. So I have it set for auto right now, which is a fairly recent enhancement. So if you're only focused on interacting with cloud APIs or APIs that are publicly accessible, you can automatically use the embedded cloud agent. If you want to interact with private APIs behind a firewall or APIs that are sitting, on your local machine and you're spinning them up through your own local host or locally through Docker, you will need to install a local connection agent. So you would just click this here and follow the download wizard. So it supports all of the different common operating systems that are out there. Hit download, go through that wizard, and then once that's started, then you can start tunneling through to your local APIs as well.
Yeah, looks good. Any other questions from anybody in the audience? Going once. The one question just popped up. Do you have references you could recommend for API standardization?
Yes, we have. So what we'll do, Antoinette, is we'll make sure that some of those are included in the follow-up email that will get sent out that will contain this recording. So we'll also include some links to some API standardization tips and tricks there as well. So just before we go, what I would say, if anyone is interested in connecting more with SmartBear, our SmartBear Connect conference is back. So it's going to be virtually, it's going to be in the US, it's going to be in Europe. So yeah, we do welcome you to come along and register, and you get to come and hang out with those SmartBear folks, and we'll get to discuss everything around APIs, testing, and observability. So thank you everyone for your time. Thanks very much to those who stayed with us. 6 minutes already over, so much appreciated, and look forward to hearing from you as we continue our exploration journey.
Thank you very much, everybody. You have a wonderful rest of your days.